Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the Flight Deck. And of course, that means more smart talk radio is in your future. And we are extremely pleased to have an encore presentation. Actually, not an encore presentation, but back for an encore. With us is Steve Boggan. Who is Steve Boggan? He is an author extraordinaire. The last time he was on his show, he talked about a new work called Follow the Money, where he followed a dollar bill around its travels all around the United States and made an exciting report about that. He is out now. He's back to the States, this time hunting for gold, a brand new work called Gold Fever, One Man's Adventures on the Trail of the Gold Rush. Should be an interesting conversation indeed. Steve, how are you, my friend?
I'm great, Warner, and thanks very much for having me back.
Yeah, well, we're pleased to have you back here. You're kind of our guy on the road digging up all kinds of stories. Let's, again, so you moved from following a dollar bill around the United States, and now you're hell-bent on finding some gold. Tell us a little bit about the inspiration and the idea and what led you to want to follow. Well, everybody, I guess, would want to follow some gold, but why now and why the book?
Okay, well, basically, it harks back to the financial crisis in 2008, when the price of gold went through $1,000 an ounce for the first time. That was in March 2008. And, of course, it coincided with a lot of people being made redundant from work as the financial crisis hit around the world. And I was sent by a magazine from London to California because there were reports coming in of a sort of a mini gold rush. And they wanted me to take a look. So I went along, and I found myself completely baffled by what I saw because, on the one hand, these people weren't finding very much gold, and I thought they were a little bit crazy. But on the other hand, I really envied them because they were living the dream. They were looking for gold. They were living up in the mountains, breathing fresh air, enjoying the camaraderie. And bit by bit, I could see that for some of them, the gold mattered less than the lifestyle. Anyway, I came back to London, and I found myself really envying these people. And then I watched over the next 3 years as the price of gold went towards $2,000 an ounce. So if you think about it, this is 6,000 years since the pharaohs in Egypt first began mining gold to get to $1,000 an ounce, and then just 3 more for it to double. And I promised myself that when it got to $2,000 an ounce, I was going to go myself and try my hand. So I watched, and it got to $1,920 an ounce. And then my bag was packed. I was ready to go, And then it just fell and fell and fell. But I was so sad about this that I thought, what the heck? And I jumped on a plane and I flew to California to try my luck.
So I have a question for you. My understanding is that some geologists believe 80% of California gold is yet to be found. Why is there not, or is there, big corporate efforts to go there and do some serious sort of industrial strength prospecting versus just sitting around and dipping in a stream?
Well, there are some big, there are, and there have been in the past, some big corporate efforts to find gold. One of the problems with it is that the price fluctuates so much that to open up a gold mine and to find gold, so to do all the geological surveying and all of the work that goes into that, and then to have the front end money, if you like, all that, those millions of dollars up front, it requires a bit of stability. So, for example, when gold was reaching $2,000 an ounce, all of a sudden people started putting money into gold again and investing in gold. And some disused mines were actually reopened because at $2,000 an ounce, it was economical to spend all that money to fetch that gold. Now, gold is below $1,300 an ounce. So if you had put money into a project to find gold, whereby, at the time it was $2,000, and let's say you could break even at $1,700, it might look like a good investment, except that now it's at $1,200 an ounce, and you would have lost an awful lot of money. So I think people are rather reluctant because it's so volatile. And it's a lot of money up front in order to sort of get into that sort of operation.
When you think of gold fever, you think of the gold rush, you think of Alaska, you think of California, a little bit of probably in Oregon as well. But the people that did that a century and a half ago and beyond, they were hardy souls, were they not?
Oh, they were. Because if you were heading out from the East Coast or from the Midwest as it was then, you had to traverse what was known at the time as the Oregon Trail, and then it was extended over the Sierra Nevada to become the Oregon-California Trail. And from the East Coast to San Francisco was 3,000 miles. From, the recognized trailheads at the time, which would have been at Council Bluffs in Iowa, or Independence or St. Joseph in Missouri. Even from there, it was still a good 2,000 miles into what was then, largely unexplored territory. Because people had settled. People had settled, towards Oregon. But not many had crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains into California. And it was still a relatively unknown land. So if you headed out there, the average journey was probably about 5 months. And at first, it was relatively easy going until you sort of rose up towards South Pass. And then beyond South Pass, you had an awful lot of heavy journeying to take place. There were mountains, there were rivers, there were deserts. There's the Great Basin, there's 40-mile desert. And then you've got to go over the Sierra Nevada mountains, which have more than 500 peaks at over 12,000 feet. I mean, this was really, really tough going. And if you went out there, you generally went on the assumption that you probably weren't coming back. You were going to stay. And they were very, very brave to undertake it. There were some estimates. I mean, in total, so from all around the world, not just from the USA as it was at the time, there are estimates of as many as 350,000 people going to look for gold in California between 1848 and 1855. And there are some estimates to suggest that as many as 1 in 5 of those people might have died, either on their way there or in the gold fields once they arrived. I mean, it was foolhardy to a certain extent, and it was a great adventure, but I think that the common factor in all of this was that you had to have a certain degree of bravery.
Well, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck, of course, of Lewis at Large Radio, and we are in the middle of an interesting segment with Steve Boggan. He has been on this show before with a book called Follow the Money, this time with a work describing his adventures in California called Gold Fever, One Man's Adventures on the Trail of the Gold Rush. He has written for the London Times, numerous other publications, but he is into real-life adventures and writing about them. Steve, what about... as you were out there and tell us a little bit about how did you learn how to prospect yourself, and tell us about some of the prospecting you actually did.
Okay. Well, I was advised. I didn't know anything about this at all, apart from the little I'd seen when I did a very brief, magazine assignment back in 2008. So I was aware of the general principles, but I didn't have a clue where to look for gold. I didn't have a clue how to find it, and I didn't have a clue how to pan for it once I'd found pay dirt. I was also a little bit shaky on the law surrounding claims. And so one very, very kind miner who I made contact with over the internet, when he realized how little I knew, he suggested I went to a place in the very far north of California called Happy Camp. And that is the name of the town, Happy Camp. He said there was good gold up there, but more than anything, there were a lot of kind people who would give me the time of day. And he was right. I went up there and I arrived as a very, very serious greenhorn with no equipment. I struggled even to put my tent up. I'm a writer, Warner, so I've got really soft hands. I've never done a hard day's work in my life. And I turned up with nothing more than a penknife and a request for a little bit of help. There was a part of me that was very worried about this because I imagined that, looking for gold would be a solitary pursuit. And, of course, that people would jealously guard their secrets and not share them. But they did. And within a few days, somebody had shown me what sort of equipment I needed and helped me to buy it. Somebody else had given me some advice on where to look for gold. Somebody else on exactly how to find it and how to pan for it. And another guy then subsequently let me work on his claims. And this was all in the first week that I arrived there, which when you think about it, it reflects incredibly well on the people involved in that kind of subculture. And I think what it is, I'm quite sure they took pity on this, limey greenhorn, without doubt. But at the same time, all while they were sharing their knowledge and their information with me and giving me help, this was all time when they weren't looking for gold. So if ever the expression, time is money means anything, it's the time when you're not looking for gold, and yet they were prepared to give that up for me. I was a bit surprised by that, but surprised in a very, very nice way. Once I'd learned a little bit, I did blaze my own trail, and I panned for gold in the Klamath River, the Yuba, the Downey, the Stanislaus, Merced, American, several creeks, Indian Creek, Mariposa Creek, and lots of other places in between. I must have covered about 2,000 miles. And I got a little bit better all along the way. I finished up in the Burr River, which is only about 30 miles from where gold was first found in 1848. And I had 2 months of what I can only describe as possibly the most uplifting moments of my life. It was a wonderful experience.
What about, so how do, I'm just curious, are there still people doing this seriously out there, or is it just kind of people now doing it kind of as a glorified hobby?
I would say the vast majority are just doing it for fun. It's a terrific hobby. It gets you away from the TV. You go up into the mountains, you meet like-minded people, you do some exercise. Goodness knows, most of us need that these days. But also you find gold. Most days, if you know what you're doing, you will find some gold. And that's uplifting. If you wake up every day thinking that you're probably going to find gold, but you might even find a lot of gold if you're lucky, because that still does happen. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. Then it really puts you in a great state of mind, a very positive state of mind. But there are some people who do it seriously and try to make a living out of it. And I met some of them as well. And they were as kind as the people who were just doing it for fun. Some people took me out to their spots and showed me how they do it. And you've got to be dedicated to do that. But by the same token, the feeling you got was that they really enjoyed being their own boss, being, in the great outdoors, sleeping under the stars. I mean, there's a lot to be said for it.
What about when you told people you were going to do it? Were people excited for you, or did they think you were nuts?
I didn't tell anybody for years. I said I kept an eye on it from 2008 as it climbed and climbed and climbed. And I had this little promise to go looking for it myself when it got to 2000. Well, all of that was spent in silence. I didn't tell anybody. I mean, my fiancée would have thought, bonkers. She would have thought I was completely bonkers. The people I usually work for, because I'm a freelance writer, so I work for a number of people, but I'm not joined at the hip with these people. I'm sure they would have found somebody else to do the work that I do for them. Yeah, I think people would have thought I was bonkers. When I actually decided to do it, I did it so fast that not many people really got to find out. My fiancée is very, very understanding. She has to be, doesn't she, if she lets me go up, to the States following a $10 bill for a month. And I said, look, I'll see you when I've struck it rich.
So, when you were out there, is this going out in a car, hiking, doing all that, and coming back? Or are you out there for long, extended periods of time, overnight, or weeks and days at a time?
Well, I was away. I say away. I mean, I was in California for the best part of 2 months. For most of that time, I was camping, and you can't just pitch a tent anywhere. Unless you really go up in the middle of nowhere where nobody can see you, you'll pitch a tent. You're not supposed to do that. Most wild country is still national park territory, and you're not really supposed to camp out like that. I expect people do who are better informed than I am, Warner. But as a foreigner, I thought, I'm going to stick to the rules. You don't go to somebody else's country and not respect the rules. So I found myself camping in Forestry Service campsites, places like this. But some of them were much more deserted than others. And I was very, very fortunate. on more than one occasion to be on sites where there was nobody else. There was just me, and it was up in the mountains and by rivers where, to be honest, I had occasional fears about bears and things like this. And I enjoyed that enormously. The isolation was fantastic. There'd be other times when I was on campsites with other people, and that was good too, because you had communal times in the evening, and you talked a lot about gold, and you picked up good tips. So it's a mixture of both. But did I put a knapsack on my back and hike out into absolute wilderness and do the whole survival thing? No, I didn't. I'm too much of a greenhorn for that.
Okay. Well, the other thing, too, is what we forget about the gold rush, in addition to people getting rich, other people losing everything, a lot of longtime, well-known American businesses were started and thrived and grew and have their origins in the gold rush. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, fairly quickly. In 1849 was when people actually arrived. They very quickly realized that prices were absolutely extortionate because of scarcity. So, for example, if you needed a pair of boots in 1849, you were probably going to have to pay the equivalent today of about $3,000. There are reports of people paying the equivalent of $30 for a slice of bread and $60 if it had butter on it. So that's what we were looking at the time. People were finding gold, but they were also finding that they were going to have to spend that gold if they wanted a bed, a meal, a drink, and a little bit of entertainment. So the smart people were the people who mined the miners. They were the ones who set up businesses and provided goods and services. And some of the best-known household names in the States started that way. Philip Armour, the meat magnate, he first started selling meat in Hangtown in California, the place which is now called Placerville. In the same place, actually, come to think of it, a young man called John Studebaker began making wheelbarrows for the miners, and of course he ended up with a giant automobile empire. Henry Wells and William Fargo, Wells Fargo, they founded American Express in San Francisco, providing financial services to people. They made a fortune through banking. And of course, last but not least, Levi Strauss. He was fresh off the boat from Bavaria, and the first thing he noticed was that these miners, their clothes were falling apart. They needed some serious heavy-duty clothing. He invented what he called his waist overalls, and of course the rest is history. Now, now we're all wearing them.
Indeed, we are. Again, we're with Steve Boggan. Again, he's the author of Gold Fever, One Man's Adventure on the Trail of the Gold Rush. He's got extensive writing for the London Times, The Guardian, and a variety of other publications, along with an earlier work that we talked with him about a couple of years ago called Follow the Money. As you look back on your adventure out there, what would you say is was the pleasant surprise or the pleasant revelation, so to speak, and what might have been something that maybe you were sort of either disappointed about or were sort of saddened to learn in some way?
I think the most uplifting aspect of this was, aside from the kindness, I did encounter a lot of kindness, but I always encounter that when it comes to the States one. I did last time when I was following money. But on this particular occasion, I think what I found refreshing was that people did seem to get gold fever, but a lot of the people I met, they went through it. They went through the other side of it. A little bit like a fever. They say the fever's broken overnight. And I think people realize that most of them aren't going to get rich. But they found a different kind of value in it, in as much as they enjoyed camaraderie, they enjoyed improved health, they got out there, they enjoyed themselves, and I think they began to get a sense of what's really important in life. There was one day when I went prospecting with a guy who was suffering from Alzheimer's, and we went looking for a spot where 30 years earlier he'd found 9 ounces of gold in a single day. I was worried as to whether he'd be able to find this place because it was a mile hike down into a canyon, and it was very difficult to get to. And we got down there, and I didn't even look for gold that day because all of a sudden, all his memories came flooding back. And when you see something like that, you realize that gold is nothing when compared with your health. So there were days like that when I got a true sense of the importance of what's really, what really matters to me in life. And I think health is the most important thing. A lot of other people I met had also come to that conclusion. And I found that really encouraging, that most people seem to have discovered what was really important to them by looking for something that they thought was important, but that they subsequently found wasn't really that important at all. That was uplifting. Possibly the one disappointment I had was when I met an otherwise really, really delightful guy. He had a lovely family who he introduced me to, and we went prospecting together on his claim one day, and then later on another river. And the way gold prospecting works is that you start off with a lot of dirt, and you process it down, and you process it down, and you filter it until you're left with what you call pay dirt. It's the heaviest of the stuff there, which should include gold. And then you pan it out. You wash it layer by layer, knowing that gold is at the bottom because it's 9 times heavier than water, so you can afford to slosh it about a bit. And you do that. And we had reached the point in the day where we had our pay dirt. And it was he gave it to me. He said, "You have it." And he was being hospitable. But I wouldn't take it. I'd learned from other miners that you should never do that. You never take more than your fair share. So I said, no, I would go, and I would pan it that night, and I would bring back the proceeds the next day. And I did. And the next day, he made it fairly clear that he thought I'd stolen some, which was really, really sad. When you bear in mind, the night before, the guy had offered to give me all of it. And once I'd processed it down, he didn't think there was enough in there. And it was a very disappointing experience. But it was also quite sad because I liked this guy. And he had gold fever. He had convinced himself that somebody was trying to diddle him out of something that only the night before he was prepared to give away. And he wouldn't take this gold off me. So the next time I got to a post office, I put all of the gold in a vial, his and mine, and I mailed it all back to him because, I didn't want it to sully the gold that I had. And it felt like it would sully it. So that was disappointing. But in a way, I'm also glad to have experienced it because people told me about gold fever. So to experience it close up was quite illuminating.
Well, you have come to America and followed a $10 bill around. You've come to America and sought after gold in the Pacific Northwest and in California. What in the world is next for you?
That's a good question, isn't it? My agent keeps asking me that. I've got a few projects. I've got a few ideas, and they're in this phase where it's a bit like you plant a seed and you see if it grows. But you won't be surprised to find out that one of them, once again, is in the States. I can't seem to keep away from the place, and there's probably a good reason for that. I just enjoyed it so much. If that one comes to fruition, Warner, maybe you let me come back and talk about it.
Absolutely, no question about it. Well, listen, again, the work is Gold Fever, One Man's Adventure on the Trail of the Gold Rush by Steve Boggan. Steve, how can people find out more about all the stuff that you do and also get a copy of the book?
Well, I post a lot of information on my Facebook page. It's called Steve Boggan Journalist. And the book is on sale at Barnes & Noble and via Amazon.com.
Well, we appreciate it. Best of luck. And again, this invitation stands. You are welcome back here anytime, and can't wait to talk to you again.
Thanks, Warner. Thanks for the time. I really appreciate it.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.